Okay, hello again. First time here, welcome, or welcome back. If you've been here before, this is going to be episode number 2 now of Gamified Hacking. Last time we did top level domains, scope domains, seed domains, whatever you want to call it, getting base domains that we can work with. This time around, we are going to work on collecting subdomains. I stuck with GameStop as a target since we did that as one of them last time, and we're just going to stick with the base domain of GameStop.com to make it simple as we go into subdomain enumeration and brute forcing and everything else. But first thing I want to mention is as we get into subdomains, get into endpoints, get into stuff like that, the biggest thing to remember is when it comes to recon, a lot of these tools are publicly available, a lot of these techniques are publicly available, and stuff like that. But the biggest advantage that you can ever give yourself from recon when we're doing this is trying to do as much of it as you can, as extensively as you can, constantly monitoring for new subdomains, etc. Because the number one way to get an advantage in recon is to find stuff that other people don't find. If you're hacking on something that millions or hundreds of thousands of other hackers have already hacked on, the chances that you find something are very small per se compared to finding that weird rogue subdomain that no one else has found yet, or the very few people have found yet, or the one that just popped up in the subdomain list today that wasn't there yesterday, and hacking on it. That gives you a much better chance of finding something versus just going to www.gamestop.com and throwing XSS payloads or whatever into search bars and whatever you may find. Doesn't mean it won't work, just means that it probably won't work as much as you would like it to if you're trying to get paid. So again, this video is going to be on the subdomain finding part. There's two main ways that I would say that there are. There's passive and then there's active. So passive is like my way of saying what some people call subdomain scraping as well, where you're just going to other sources that have been built out on the internet to find subdomains that people have been archiving and keeping track of for subdomains. And there's a couple tools that go over that. The main two that I use are Amass by OWASP and Subfinder, which is Project Discovery's tool, I believe. Both of those tools, you can just throw a bunch of API keys into the config file for using that tool, and a lot of those APIs are free. And all it does is go hit those APIs and grab subdomains that service has been recording, and it will put it all in one place for you. I have demo files, output of that, and I'll be putting in the description all of the GitHub links that have all the documentation on how to run the tools, all of that stuff. And I also have basically a little text file that shows all the commands that I use to generate some of the data we have here. But the stuff that I demo in the video will be maybe like half, if not even half, of some of the stuff that you can go do. It's just showing you quickly what some of it would look like and kind of throwing it together into a little like chain that you can do. So again, passive stuff, Amass, Subfinder are my two big tools for pulling all this information out of APIs of services that have already been recording and keeping track of subdomains across the internet. Also, Rapid7 has a huge data set full of domains from DNS information that they've taken off the internet. And there's a service called Crobat, well, a tool, it's not a service, but a tool called Crobat that will basically allow you to look through that. I'm going to use that and show you that output as well. And again, that's still passive because all you're doing is accessing Rapid7's data. You're not hitting the target. Active is you're actually hitting the target, hitting DNS servers, trying to resolve subdomains, brute forcing subdomains, which is what we're going into right now. So active testing for subdomains would include crawling already known domains and checking links and trying to find or discover new links that would lead you to new subdomains. Or the more obvious one is just brute forcing subdomains, right? Taking a list of stuff or list of well-known subdomains, and there's a bunch of these word lists out there, and putting it in front of your domain and just seeing what sticks with a DNS resolver. I use pure DNS, but there's, again, I'll repeat this multiple times through the video, but there's so many tools to do this stuff. So many tools do similar things that it's worth doing your research on which ones perform better as well as, which one you prefer. Some of them, may have similar performance as well. You just may like one better. One may be in the language you like and may fit better with some other automation you're trying to do or whatnot. I'm showing you ones that I prefer, and pure DNS is the one that I prefer. And then also along the lines of brute forcing is you can take domains you've already found and do alteration scanning, which basically means if I find dev.gamestop.com during here, maybe there's a dev1.gamestop.com, a dev2, dev/devs.gamestop.com, or staging.gamestop. Like if there's a dev, maybe there's also a staging and a prod, that kind of stuff. So that's what alteration scanning is looking for. I'm going to show a little example of that too. I'm not actually going to be running these tools on the screen, not because it's a big secret or anything, but just because some of them take a while. Against GameStop, they don't take too long. I think maybe the brute forcing with the list I was using took like 10 minutes or 8 minutes or something. But just to keep the video nice and short, I'm trying to keep them as short as possible and get information out there and be done. I'm not going to actually sit here and watch the tool run with you. So that's really it as far as the tools that I'm going to show you. There's other stuff too, like again, Shodan we talked about before, you can use to find subdomains. We talked about Google dorking for top level domains, same thing for subdomains. There's a bunch of dorks out there that you can use to find subdomains. That's all the same thing. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, and there's a stuff that I haven't talked about or other tools that I may not mention. One of the best places to go if you're looking for more information beyond the tools that I've used, or maybe pictures or just another explanation of the workflow, and especially this kind of goes for a bunch of stuff we were on. In episode 0, I think I mentioned that there were a bunch of other hackers out there and a bunch of other content creators and a bunch of other people on Twitter. One of those people is Jason Haddix, Jay Haddix. I'll link his Twitter in the description. And I think in his bio of his Twitter, he has all of his links to his YouTube and all that other stuff. He does something called the bug hunters methodology. There's a recon side and there's an app analysis side that's out currently at the time of this video. I think the recon side, the current version is version 4. If you go look up Jay Haddix bug bounty methodology version 4, you'll find it. Part of that, there's a lot more of that, which we'll go into in future videos, and I'm sure we'll reference him again because it's, again, super amazing content. But one of those chunks of his recon methodology is subdomains, and he talks about a lot of this stuff and some other stuff and gives some tools and other examples as well. So if you want more information, go check that out. I'll link his Twitter in the description, and he obviously gives a bunch of great information about other stuff other than just this. So going into some of the demos, some of the stuff we found, the first thing we'll go over here, if we'll just show, these are some of the commands we're going to go over. So again, we're going to go over Amass, Subfinder, Crobat. Those are our passive ones, those top 3. And then pure DNS, obviously with the brute force command, will be brute forcing, as well as, and then this is just kind of an example of a command I'm going to use at the end after we've done passive and after I brute forced, and those domains have been resolved. I'm going to combine all those into a final file called collected.subdomains, and I'll be able to show you in that file kind of like how many we were able to find just by throwing a few of these tools around with, like, again, I'm just on a VM on my computer, like no huge amount of computing power, no huge amount of like crazy anything. And then with those collected domains, I like to use Gotator. Also, AltDNS is a really good tool to do alteration scanning, but I prefer Gotator because I'm kind of becoming a Go fanatic recently. So we're going to use Gotator, and we're going to put in that collected subdomains list that I already have and try and find permutations of it, and then I'm going to resolve it with this command. So after it generates me this huge list called subs to resolve, just what I picked to call it, we're going to use pure DNS again, but with the resolve function instead of this brute force function, and we're just going to resolve this huge list of generated subdomains that I made, and I'm going to write them to alt domains, and then at the end I combined it into a final list, and I'll show you we actually did gain a few domains from doing alteration scanning and resolving those. I think we got like 20 or so, right? But it's interesting when you look at some of this stuff, right? So On this machine, I don't have any APIs set up for these two tools. But if you go to the GitHub pages that are linked in the description and look at these tools, they very specifically tell you where to go, how to set it up, and what API keys are free and what aren't. I highly, 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 highly recommend, if you're going to use either of these tools, go get the free API keys, put them in. It takes like 10 to 30 minutes max to set up, and you will get so many more domains. When I use these tools, like actually with my hunting, I always have the API keys. I've tried to pay for a few. People will argue whether or not you get a few more from the paid ones. That's up for you to decide if you want to pay for some of the paid API keys, but for sure use the free ones, because A, free, and B, you get noticeably more results. Okay, so for instance, some of the first ones we're going to go over here is I'll look at the amass file that came out of this top command here when I ran amass. And if you look at it, only one thing came back. Now again, I didn't have any of the API keys set up. It's just like basic stuff. And again, amass can be used to do brute forcing as well. I put the passive flag on it because I'm just using it in this video as a passive tool. If you take that off, or I think there's even an active flag you can put in, you can have it do some brute forcing as well with either default lists or lists that you give it. So amass is one of those tools that's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. My personal findings and other people's findings has shown that using an actual tool for brute forcing is a little bit better and a little bit faster than amass, maybe on the actual active scanning and mass brute forcing, but that's up for you to decide. So when you see here, amass only found one subdomain. So if you're only using amass and that's the only tool you used, you get one thing. That's it. But if we go look at the subfinder one that we found later, whoa, all of a sudden there's way more. Way more, right? So there's two different passive tools that are doing the same thing. So if we do a word count for lines on subfinder, so subfinder found 485 subdomains. Now, this is a passive tool, so I want to reiterate that not all 485 of those domains are alive right now. It found 485 domains from its APIs that it pulled and from other sources that it pulled. That doesn't mean that all 485 are alive. They could have been taken down, they could have been moved, etc., etc. But right now we have a list of 485 domains that it thinks exist. And same thing with amass, right? Now Crobat, which we talked about before, is pulling from like a monthly, I think, or so generated data set from Rapid7 that it's going over the whole internet trying to find DNS information. So from that one, for Crobat, we ended up getting all these domains as well. And if we word count it again, it found about 117. Again, doesn't mean they're all there. That some of them could have moved or went down after the list was generated, or same day, literally a second later, like you don't know. And of these 117, we still haven't sorted anything. So these 117 could all be in the subfinder list that we were just looking at. We don't know. That's one of the commands that I was going to do in a second. So the other thing before we started, or before I put everything together, is I ran the brute force command. So looking at the commands again, we just went over amass's findings from this file, or this command. We went over subfinder's findings from this command, and then we went over Crobat's findings from this command. The last one, before I combined them all, was I did a brute force with resolving. So I clarified my resolvers I wanted to use. Now DNS resolvers means that I'm actually, once I I make a list of all these subdomains that I'm going to test for from this word list. I'm going to append them to the front of GameStop. And then this is the output file that I'm writing to. And this resolvers file means use the resolvers in this file to actually try and resolve them and make sure they're live subdomains. So this should give me like only live ones, but I do retest them just in case at the end anyway. But if we word count that output file, the pure DNS brute force domains, I got 116 resolved subdomains from that list. Now, if I take my word list just to show you for reference, I found and resolved 116 subdomains. The list I was using is about 1 million. So we tried 1 million things and 116 resolved. Now, that percentage probably goes down the higher you go. any of you are into statistics, that's just normally how it works. You don't get the same percentage of results just by throwing in, 2 million doesn't mean you get 200 something. You normally don't get that, but you can try. There's no limit to what this word list can be, and there's all of these word lists are everywhere. Again, people like Jason Haddix and a couple of other people that I've watched make really good videos on choosing word lists for brute forcing, fuzzing, etc., which we'll go over later. But this is the word list I'm using. It doesn't really matter which one you use. Pick one you like, use it. Just for reference, though, about 1.1 million tries, I resolved about 116 of them. So now, as you can see up here, all I did, for people who don't know, all this is doing is taking all of these domain lists that I made in these commands, and I'm turning them into one list that's sorted. So there's no duplicates now. And it's all in a list that I made called collected subdomains. So if we go to here, we go to collected subdomains, I have about 493. So as you would guess, if you did the math, a lot of those were crossovers between all the different lists. Because adding them all together, they're probably like around 700, 800 total if you just add the lists and just stacked them on top. But with it all sorted and only unique domains in there, we have about 493 in this list. Now, for alteration scanning, what I did is I took those collected subdomains, this list right here, so we have 493 domains that, for the brute force ones, I know they're there, but for the passive ones, we never resolved. But ones we think are there or used to be there or from APIs that have seen them there. We took those and we have alteration words here. So those are our permutations we're going to try and change, and we can put words on. So if I cat some of those, let me just copy this and I'll cat that list, and you can see. So these are some of the words we'll throw instead of it. We'll throw appended, dependent, like whatever, get thrown onto it, right? And there are 232 of those. So it's going to take those 493 subdomains from this collected subdomains. It's going to use these permutations. I only have one depth. You can crank this up as far as you want to. It only has a chance of getting you higher results, but obviously takes more time. Numbers means I'm throwing numbers at the beginning and end of stuff, up to 10 digits. Advanced means I want it to use all different kinds of permutations. This makes it use all of the available RAM. Again, you can look up Gotator and look up all these flags and look up how to use it. This is how I'm using it, just as an example. And again, I'm just carroting it. I'm just sending it to a file called subs to resolve, because again, this is going to generate, if I word count the subs to resolve, this just made me a list of about 4 million now possible changed subdomains. It took that 493 and turned it into a list of 4 million possible things, right? So this is obviously pretty powerful, because you're taking things that we know either used to exist very recently or do exist, and we turn them into 4 million things that are very close to those things, just tweaked a little bit to see if those exist, right? So this is obviously a super powerful thing that I know a lot of people skip over. So if you don't skip over this, I promise you it will help you. And I'm going to show you why right now. Because this next command, all we're doing is we're using pure DNS to resolve this list of 4 million subdomains to a file called valid alt domains. Now if we, again, just count how many lines there are, there's 284 of those. So there's much less of those. Now, what I did is I took the this valid alt domains file in the collected subdomains file, and I put them together into a file called final list of subdomains, right? Now if I word count that, there's 512 of them. Now if you remember from the other word count, from the collected one, before we did any alteration scanning, there was 493. So there are in this list about 20 new domains that were resolved, so we know they're there. They have an IP address, they have a CNAME, they have some kind of DNS record for them. 20 new ones that weren't found by any of the passive discovery or our brute force of 1 million subdomains. There was an extra 20 that we just caught using that alteration scanning. That kind of stuff is going to be the domain, like I said, those rogue domains that not many people look at, not many people see, And especially, again, if they resolve to something and they have open ports and you can hit them and play with them, if there's something lives there, those are the key juicy targets you want to look for. At least start at, especially if they look interesting or have interesting stuff on them, right? We'll go over that later. But those are the subdomains that we're trying to find here. We're trying to find as many outlandish, weird, old, etc. subdomains that we can. Just running a mass or just running a subfinder or just brute forcing, it gives you stuff. It gives you stuff to hack for sure. But putting all of this together helps you really create a whole attack surface. I'm going to end this video the same way I ended the last one. Keeping track of these is so important. Taking these 512 subdomains that I have here in the final list and deleting them a week later or just regenerating them a week later doesn't do me any good. I promise you, it doesn't do you any good, because there's no way in a day or a week of hacking I'm going to go check all 512 unless I'm really just doing it all the time. I guess I shouldn't say you can't do it, because I know there's people out there who can, but I probably won't. But of these 512 domains, what if tomorrow GameStop puts up a new domain, a new subdomain? If I just go do all these steps again and regenerate a list, I don't know, even if my list is now 513. Wow, there's a new one. I got a new one, but I don't know which one the new one was, right? There's tools like Anu by Tom Nom Nom. You can use data storage in AWS that will tell you what data is new and what data is not to a data set. You can diff files. You could save this file, generate a new final list subdomains tomorrow and just diff and just see the difference. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. But a number one skill that a lot of people miss over is continually monitor subdomains. If I'm going to look at GameStop for an extended period of time, I'm going to be monitoring subdomains, maybe even almost daily, depending on the size of the target. You might not want to do it against something like Yahoo or something like crazy humongous. But against GameStop, this whole process before I recorded this video took me like maybe 15 minutes. So is it maybe worth 15 minutes when I start hacking again tomorrow on GameStop to rerun these steps, or even just write a bash script that runs it for me, automation, and rerun it for me, and then take those two lists and diff them, or whatever, and see, oh, maybe there's a new domain that resolved today that wasn't there yesterday. That could just be a weird thing that happened, and sometimes stuff like that happens with resolvers and whatever. Or maybe it's a domain that just got put up, or just got put back up, or just moved, or whatever. You don't know. But it's probably worth looking at, because what if that domain was brand new that day? What if GameStop put up a brand new that day, put up a brand new domain? Maybe you're the first one that saw it. Maybe you're the first one that finds it. And what if there's data on there? What if there's a web app hosted on there? You were the first one, or one of the first people to look at it. That's where it comes. That's where the rogue domains, that's another spot they slip in. All those little niche areas are where a lot of top tier hackers live, constantly monitoring subdomains. I know multiple people that I know have some kind of automation set up that doesn't do the hacking automatically for them or anything. All it does is tell them, hey, your automation found a new subdomain. This subdomain just showed up today, and it's live. Go look at it. And they pull up Burp, and they pull it up, and they go at it. This is just some of the things to look for. Again, this is why we'll have a video on it later, but this is why data management, data handling, there's a bunch of ways to do it, however you want to do it, but it's all important to keep notes and keep track of all the stuff you're doing. It's hugely, hugely important. That's all I have this time around. This is subdomains enumeration. Again, check out Jason Haddock's stuff. Check out other content creator stuff. Do your research. Check out the tools in the description below. Play with it yourself. Recon in general is a huge skill to learn. This is a big part of it. But I'll see you guys next time.